They told me it was just the market. I told them congratulations because they just lost the person keeping their market from crashing. I signed my resignation right there in the HR office. Within 12 minutes, the system lit up red. However, the technical failure was not what made them panic. The real terror started when they realized what I had emailed before leaving the parking lot. I had prepared a mirror bright enough to reflect their entire ugly truth. My name is Claire Butler. I am 39 years old, and for the last decade, I have been the principal reliability architect at Brightforge Systems. That title meant I was the person who ensured that when a surgeon in a regional hospital clicked a button to view a patient's drug allergy history, the data appeared instantly rather than timing out. It meant that when a bank teller in the Midwest processed a withdrawal, the ledger actually updated. I was the invisible wall standing between order and digital chaos. But as I sat across from Dana Kessler in the glass-walled fishbowl that served as the Human Resources office, I realized that to Brightforge, I was nothing more than a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be optimized. Dana, the head of people operations, smiled that practiced, tight-lipped smile that corporate training videos suggest conveys warmth, but actually conveys predatory indifference. She slid a single sheet of paper across the laminate table toward me. The movement was smooth, like she was offering me a treat for good behavior. "We have finished our annual compensation review." "Claire," Dana said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "I think you are going to be pleased. The executive team really values your stability." I looked at the paper. I did not pick it up. My eyes went straight to the bolded number near the bottom. 2.1%. They were offering me a raise of 2.1%. The silence in the room stretched thin. I did not blink. I did not frown. I simply did the math in my head. Inflation was running at nearly 4%. This was not a raise. It was a pay cut. It was a statistical insult. But the number itself was not what made the bile rise in my throat. What made my hands cold was the comparison that immediately flashed through my mind. Gavin Royce. Gavin had joined the company 3 months ago as the Director of Data Transformation. He had a shiny MBA from a prestigious university and a vocabulary consisting entirely of buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift. He also had a salary that I knew for a fact was nearly 40% higher than mine. I knew this because Gavin was sloppy with his browser tabs during screen share sessions. Gavin was the man who, just last Tuesday, had pulled me aside after a meeting to ask me if a load balancer was a piece of hardware or a cloud concept. This man, who was being paid 40% more than the person who built the entire infrastructure he was supposed to be transforming, did not know the basic geography of our system. "Is there a problem?" Claire Dana asked, tilting her head. She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. "This is actually slightly above the standard merit pool for this cycle." 2.1%, I repeated, my voice flat. "Dana, Gavin Royce was hired at a base salary 40% higher than my current cap. He has been here 90 days. I have been here 9 years. Last month, I manually patched a critical vulnerability in the ingestion pipeline at 3 a.m. that would have exposed the data of 400,000 patients. Gavin was sleeping. I was working." Dana sighed. It was a rehearsed sound, a performance of patience dealing with a difficult child. She clasped her hands on the table. "Claire, we have discussed this. You are comparing apples to oranges. We have to look at market realities. Gavin is in a strategic leadership role. His banding is different because his scope is future-facing." She leaned in closer, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Your role, while vital, is operational. It is maintenance. It is not strategic. Internal parity is calculated based on the impact on future revenue, not just keeping the lights on. The market pays a premium for transformation strategy. Operational, maintenance." The words hung in the air, to them. I was a janitor, a highly paid janitor, perhaps, but still just the person who cleans up the mess, not the architect who designs the building. They did not understand that in high-availability systems, operation is strategy. If the system goes down, there is no future revenue. There is only a lawsuit. I looked at Dana. I looked at the pathetic piece of paper. I realized then that no argument I made would matter. They had a model. They had a chart. I was in a box labeled operational, and I would die in that box if I stayed. "I see," I said. I reached into my leather tote bag. Dana relaxed visibly. She thought I was reaching for a pen to sign her insult. She thought I was accepting my place in her banding model. Instead, I pulled out a white envelope. It was sealed. It was thick. I placed it on top of the compensation adjustment letter. "What is this?" Dana asked, her smile faltering for the first time. Open it, I said. She tore the flap. Inside was a single page. It was my resignation letter. Short, professional, brutal. I took my pen from my pocket. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:14 in the morning. I need to add the time, I said calmly. I wrote 10:14 in the morning next to my signature. Then I added 2 words that made Dana's eyes widen. Effective immediately. Claire, you cannot do this, Dana stammered, the color draining from her face. We have a notice period. You have knowledge transfer requirements. We represent critical infrastructure for hospitals. You cannot just walk out. I stood up. I felt lighter than I had in 5 years. You just told me my role is operational. Dana, you said it is not strategic. Surely the strategic leaders like Gavin can figure out how to keep the lights on. After all, he is the one getting paid the premium for it. Claire, wait, we can talk about the percentage. Maybe we can get it to 3%. Goodbye, Dana. I turned and walked out of the glass fishbowl. I did not look back. I walked straight to my desk. I did not have much to pack because I had seen this coming for months. I took my framed photo of my dog. I took my favorite ceramic mug. I left everything else. I walked to the elevator. The office was humming with the low buzz of engineers coding and typing. Miles O'Connor, a senior engineer I had trained from a junior level, gave me a wave from across the room. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. Miles was smart. He would figure it out, or he would leave too. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, I looked at my phone. It was 10:17 in the morning, exactly 3 minutes since I signed the paper. I watched the signal bars on my phone. The elevator descended. Ping. My corporate email app vanished from my home screen. Ping. My calendar notifications disappeared. Ping. A notification from the system administrator popped up, device remotely wiped. Please contact IT support. They were fast. I had to give them credit for that. They had scrubbed my digital existence from the company before I had even reached the ground floor. It was a new protocol, likely something Gavin suggested to secure intellectual property. I walked out of the elevator and across the marble lobby. I approached the security turnstile. I dropped my plastic badge into the guest slot. It made a final clatter. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parking lot. The air tasted different. It tasted like freedom, but it also tasted like danger. I had just walked away from a 6-figure salary with nothing but my pride and a savings account that would last me 6 months if I was careful. I reached my car and unlocked the door. Just as I was about to throw my bag into the passenger seat, my personal phone buzzed in my hand. It was a long, sustained vibration, signaling a text message. I frowned. Nobody contacted me on my personal number during work hours except my mother, and she usually called. I looked at the screen. The number was unknown. It was not in my contacts. I opened the message. Are you sure you want to do this? They just activated the new compensation model this morning. There is something very dirty in the algorithm. You need to see what I found before you disappear. I stared at the screen. The sun glared off the glass, making the white text hard to read. A cold chill ran down my spine, despite the heat of the day. Something dirty. I looked back at the glass building towering above me. Bright Forge Systems. From the outside, it looked shiny and impenetrable, but I knew where the cracks were. I had spent 10 years patching them, and now, someone on the inside was telling me that the foundation was not just cracked, but rotten. I typed a reply, my thumbs hovering over the glass. Who is this? The response came instantly. Someone who knows what Gavin is actually paid. Check your encrypted email. I lowered the phone. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was not just about a bad raise anymore. This was about something much larger. I tossed my bag onto the seat and climbed into the car. I needed to get to a secure network. If what the stranger said was true, my resignation was not the end of the war. It was just the opening shot. They thought they had wiped me out of their system, but they had forgotten one thing. I never deleted anything, and I always kept a backup. I drove to a small coffee shop 3 towns over, a place where I knew the Wi-Fi was fast, and the baristas did not care if you sat in the corner for 5 hours. As I drove, my mind did not dwell on the resignation letter I had just signed. Instead, it drifted back to the beginning, to the ghost of the company Bright Forge used to be. To understand why my departure was not just an inconvenience but a structural catastrophe, you have to understand what Bright Forge looked like 10 years ago. Back then, it was not the polished, venture-backed giant with glass walls and espresso machines in the lobby. It was a chaotic mess of spaghetti code and panicked engineers trying to keep a database of medical records from imploding every time a user queried a patient history. I was 29 when I started. I was the person they called when the primary database locked up at 3 in the morning. For the first 4 years, I did not sleep through the night more than twice a week. I was the on-call rotation. I was the failover mechanism. The executives saw the dashboard turn green and assumed the problem was solved. They did not see me sitting on my floor in the dark, tethered to a laptop, manually rerouting traffic through a backup server I had configured in my spare time because the company refused to pay for a proper redundancy solution. They did not see me rewriting SQL queries on the fly to prevent a deadlock that would have frozen the banking transactions of half the state. I built the nervous system of that company. Over the years, I constructed layers of defense. I wrote the runbooks that dictated exactly what to do when the latency spiked above 200 milliseconds. I built the guardrails that stopped junior developers from accidentally deleting production data. I created the break glass protocols that allowed us to bypass security checks during a catastrophic failure to save the ship. But the most valuable thing I possessed was not in the code repository. It was in my head. Every complex system has ghosts. These are the edge cases, the strange, illogical behaviors that only happen under specific, bizarre sets of circumstances. There was a particular hospital chain in the Midwest that used an archaic legacy system to format their patient IDs. If those IDs hit our ingestion pipeline at the same exact second as a bank transfer from a specific credit union, the entire validation logic would crash. It made no sense. It was not documented in any manual, but I knew it. I knew that on the third Thursday of every month, we had to throttle the incoming traffic by 15% between midnight and 2 in the morning, or the backup jobs would collide with the intake jobs and corrupt the indexes. I knew that if you deployed a new version of the API while the billing cycle was running, you had to manually flush the cache on Node 4, or else the system would start charging patients double. Gavin Royce did not know about Node 4. Gavin Royce probably thought a cache flush was a poker term. This was why the engineers on the front lines, the people who actually did the work, treated me with a reverence that bordered on religious. Miles O'Connor, a brilliant young engineer who had joined 2 years ago, once told me that I was the only reason he had not quit in his first month. "You are the system whisperer, Claire," he had said to me after I walked him through a terrifying outage where we lost connection to the primary data center. I had guided him calmly, predicting exactly which error message would pop up next before it even appeared on his screen. Tasha Green, a sharp developer who was constantly underestimated by the male-dominated management, called me her human shield when she proposed a safety check that would slow down a release by 2 hours. Management screamed about velocity and time to market. I would step in. I would use my political capital to back her up. I would say, "If you do not listen to Tasha, the system will go down for 8 hours tomorrow. Do you want a 2-hour delay or an 8-hour outage?" They always listened to me, but they resented it. And that was the core of the problem with human resources. They knew I was essential, but they refused to value me as such. For the last 5 years, I had hit a glass ceiling that was carefully constructed by Dana Kessler and her team. They kept my title at Principal Reliability Architect. It sounded impressive to an outsider, but inside the corporate hierarchy, it was a trap. The next level up was Distinguished Engineer. That title came with stock options that vested differently. It came with a seat at the strategy table. It came with a salary band that started at $300,000 a year. Every year, I asked for the promotion. Every year, Dana gave me the same speech. "You are so valuable where you are, Claire," she would say. "The distinguished role is really more about external thought leadership. It is about speaking at conferences. You are the heart of our operations. We need you focused on the internal systems." They wanted me to do the work of a distinguished engineer, but pay me the salary of a principal. They wanted the safety I provided without paying the insurance premium. So I started keeping a diary. I called it my war diary. It was a physical notebook at first, then an encrypted file on my personal cloud drive. I wrote down every incident. I wrote down the root cause. I wrote down the warning I had given weeks in advance. And most importantly, I wrote down the name of the person who had ignored that warning. October 12th. Warned the VP of Engineering that the new storage array was not compatible with our encryption standard. Ignored. Result, 48 hours of downtime and a manual migration of 50 terabytes of data. Cost estimate, $200,000. January 5th. Advised against firing the senior database admin to save budget. Ignored. Result, the database fragmentations reached critical mass 3 weeks later. Query times slowed by 400%. Client churn increased by 5%. I did not do this to be petty. I did it because I knew that one day, the narrative would shift. When things went wrong, they would look for a scapegoat. I wanted to make sure I had the receipts. The irony was that I never hoarded information. I was not one of those engineers who made themselves indispensable by refusing to teach others. I tried to document everything. I wrote endless pages of technical documentation. I created flowcharts. I recorded video walkthroughs. But the leadership team, especially the new wave of executives like Gavin and the CFO Marianne Holt, did not want to hear about the messy reality. They wanted the slide deck version of the company. When I submitted documentation that said, "This system is fragile and requires manual intervention during high load," they would reject it. "That sounds too negative, Claire," they would say. "Change it to, system requires optimized oversight during peak performance windows." They sanitized the truth until the official documentation described a system that did not exist, a perfect, automated machine that practically ran itself. Gavin Royce read those documents and believed them. He looked at the charts and thought he was driving a Tesla on autopilot. He did not realize he was actually driving a beat-up manual transmission truck down a mountain road with no brakes. And I was the one hanging out the window dragging my feet on the asphalt to slow us down. I sat in the coffee shop and opened my laptop. I was not on the corporate network anymore, but I still had access to my own mind. I thought about the text message I had received in the parking lot. Something very dirty. I had suspected for a long time that the salary discrepancies were not just incompetence. The gap between what they paid me and what they paid Gavin was too large to be an accident. It was systemic, and if there was a model driving it, as the text suggested, then it was a model built to exploit people like me, people who cared too much to let the system fail, regardless of how badly we were treated. I took a sip of my black coffee. It was bitter, just like the realization that I had spent a decade building a castle for people who would not even let me in the front door. I was done holding the door open. I was done dragging my feet to slow the truck down. I had warned them. I had told them that reliability was not a feature. It was a culture. They had chosen to ignore me. They had chosen the cheaper option. They had chosen the shiny MBA over the person who knew where the bodies were buried. Now, they were about to find out exactly how many bodies there were, and just how fast they would start to smell when the air conditioning turned off. My phone buzzed again. It was Tasha. "They are asking for the root password to the legacy ingestion server. Nobody knows it. Gavin is sweating through his shirt. Did you really leave?" I looked at the message and felt a strange sense of calm. The legacy ingestion server. That was the one that handled the data for the 3 largest hospital networks in the state. If that server went down, doctors would not be able to see patient histories. Surgeries would be delayed. I knew the password. It was a complex string of characters I had memorized 6 years ago. It was written in a physical safe in the server room, but only I knew the combination to the safe, and I was fairly certain that in their haste to escort me out, they had forgotten to ask for it. I did not reply to Tasha. I liked Tasha, but she was inside the blast zone now. Any contact with me could hurt her. I closed my laptop. The show was just beginning. The decay of Brightforge Systems did not happen overnight. It began exactly 18 months before my resignation. On the day the board of directors announced that we had secured a new round of venture capital funding, with that money came a new philosophy, and with that philosophy came Clayton Voss. Clayton was our new chief executive officer. He was a man who seemed to have been manufactured in a laboratory dedicated to creating the perfect corporate avatar. He had perfect teeth, a perfect tan, and a vocabulary that consisted almost entirely of empty, shimmering buzzwords. In his first all-hands meeting, he stood on the stage, rolled up the sleeves of his $2,000 shirt, and told us that we were no longer a back-end infrastructure provider. "We are building a talent brand," Clayton had declared, his voice echoing with practiced charisma. "We are not here to move data. We are here to unlock the narrative of transformation." I remember looking at Miles O'Connor during that meeting. Miles looked like he was trying to swallow a lemon whole. We were engineers. We moved data. That was literally what the hospitals paid us to do. If we stopped moving data to focus on the narrative, patients would die. But Clayton did not care about the grim reality of uptime. He cared about the valuation. To execute this vision, Clayton brought in Marianne Holt as the new chief financial officer. Marianne was cold, efficient, and viewed the engineering department not as the engine of the company, but as a cost center that needed to be disciplined. Her first move was to hire a team of data strategy consultants who were supposed to teach us how to be modern. That was how we got Gavin Royce. Gavin was the crown jewel of Marianne's new strategy team. He walked into the office on his first day wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. Carrying a leather notebook that he never actually wrote in, he had been given the title of Director of Data Transformation, a role that theoretically placed him above me in the strategic hierarchy, even though he could not write a single line of code. The friction was immediate. In his second week, Gavin called a roadmap meeting to unveil his vision for the next fiscal year. He projected a slide deck that was beautiful, full of swooping arrows and clouds. "We need to move to real-time, synchronous ingestion for all client nodes," Gavin announced, tapping the screen with a laser pointer. "Zero latency, immediate availability. That is the North Star." The room went silent. The engineers looked at the floor. I raised my hand. "Gavin," I said, keeping my voice neutral, 70% of our hospital clients use legacy on-premise servers that only batch export data once every 4 hours. We cannot ingest in real time if the source does not send it in real time. Unless you plan to rewrite the IT infrastructure of 300 regional hospitals, that roadmap is impossible. Gavin smiled that condescending smile I would come to loathe. "Claire, that is a legacy mindset," he said. "We need to think about the art of the possible. Do not bore me with the constraints. Give me the solution." He dismissed the physical limitations of hardware as a lack of imagination on my part. From that day on, I was branded. I was the legacy architect. I was the person who said no. Gavin was the visionary who said yes, even if his yes was a lie. Then came the high-potential pipeline. This was a new hiring initiative driven by Marianne and HR. The goal was to attract top talent from Ivy League schools and prestigious MBA programs. Suddenly, the office was filled with 22-year-olds who had never managed a production server in their lives, but spoke confidently about agile velocity and synergy. The tension in the break room became suffocating. We started hearing rumors about the offer letters these new hires were receiving. Miles, who had been with the company for 5 years and was a level 3 engineer, found out that a new junior strategist who sat across from him, a kid who asked Miles how to export a CSV file, was making a base salary only $5,000 less than his. But the real insult was yet to come. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Gavin was presenting a budget analysis to the senior leadership team, but he had invited the principal engineers to sit in, presumably so we could marvel at his financial acumen. He was sharing his screen on the main projector. "We need to optimize our spend on legacy maintenance," Gavin said, clicking open an Excel file. "I have done an anonymous breakdown of our current resource allocation." He opened the file. It was a scatter plot of salaries versus strategic impact score. The names were hidden, replaced by generic labels like Resource A and Resource B, but the groupings were obvious. There was a cluster of dots in the bottom right: high technical output, low strategic score, low salary. That was us. That was the engineering core. Then there was a single dot in the top left: high salary, high strategic score. The label was Director L1. It was Gavin. I did the math in my head instantly. The y-axis represented base compensation. The dot for Director L1 was hovering near a number that made my stomach turn. It was nearly $200,000, plus a significant bonus structure. I looked at the dot that clearly represented me. Principal Arch, it was significantly lower. The gap was not just a gap. It was a canyon. Gavin quickly realized he was showing raw data and switched tabs, but the damage was done. The room felt colder. I did not say a word. I did not gasp. I did not look at Miles. I simply picked up my pen and wrote down the numbers I had seen. That night, I did not sleep. I did not rage. I went into audit mode. If they were going to quantify my value, I was going to audit their math. I spent the next 3 weeks compiling a personal dossier. I pulled every incident report from the last 5 years. I calculated the potential revenue loss for every minute of downtime I had prevented. I looked at the market rates for reliability architects in the city. I looked at the inflation data. I realized that by staying at Brightforge out of loyalty, I had effectively donated hundreds of thousands of dollars of my labor to a company that viewed me as a depreciating asset. But the final straw, the piece of evidence that turned my disappointment into cold resolve, came from a mistake so clumsy it was almost poetic. It was a Friday morning. I received an email from a junior analyst in the finance department named Kevin. Kevin was a nice kid, always overworked, always rushing. The email subject line was, "Re-Q4 budget projections, urgent." It was addressed to Marianne Holt, Dana Kessler, and Gavin Royce, but Kevin, in his panic to get the file out before the weekend, had typed Claire into the recipient field. Maybe he meant to copy another Claire in accounting. Maybe it was autocomplete betraying him. I opened the attachment before the recall notice could hit my inbox. It was a spreadsheet titled Total Rewards and Retention Modeling. I scrolled past the budget forecasts and found the tab labeled Individual Comp Planning. My eyes scanned the rows until I found my employee ID. There were the usual columns: current salary, last merit increase, performance rating. My performance rating was a solid 5 out of 5. Exceeds expectations. But then, I saw a column I had never seen before. It was labeled Comp Align Coefficient. Next to Gavin's name, the coefficient was 1.5. Next to the new high potential hires, the coefficient ranged from 1.2 to 1.4. Next to my name, and next to the names of Tasha, Miles, and every other veteran engineer over the age of 35, the coefficient was 0.8. I stared at the number, 0.8. There was a comment attached to the cell, written by a user labeled HR Admin 01. I hovered my mouse over the red triangle in the corner of the cell. The comment read, Role stickiness is high. Employee is risk-averse. Market adjustment not required to retain. Cap applied. They were not paying us based on the market. They were not paying us based on performance. They were paying us based on a calculated algorithm of how likely we were to leave. They knew I loved the system. They knew I felt responsible for the team. And they were charging me a tax for my own loyalty. My phone rang. It was Kevin from finance, hyperventilating. Claire, please, I sent that by mistake. Please delete it. If Marianne knows I sent that, she will kill me. Don't worry, Kevin, I said, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on that 0.8. I deleted it immediately. I didn't see a thing. I hung up the phone. I did not delete the file. I saved it to an encrypted USB drive. That was the moment I stopped being the principal reliability architect of BrightForge Systems. That was the moment I became an external consultant who was currently working for free, and I was about to send them the bill. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my living room. I had spent the last 3 hours dissecting the stolen spreadsheet with the forensic intensity of a coroner determining a cause of death. What I found was not just unfairness. It was a calculated, algorithmic suppression of an entire class of employees. I had already seen the gross disparity between my salary and Gavin's. That 40% gap was a slap in the face, but as I scrolled down the rows, filtering by gender and tenure, I realized Gavin was not an outlier. He was the benchmark for a new caste system. I isolated the data for the senior female engineers. There were 7 of us in the entire infrastructure division who had been with BrightForge for more than 5 years. We were the ones who knew how the legacy code actually talked to the cloud servers. We were the ones who stayed late during the Black Friday traffic spikes. Every single one of us was hovering at the absolute bottom of our respective pay bands. But the smoking gun was that extra column Kevin had accidentally revealed the comp-align score. I started cross-referencing the score with other variables. I wanted to know what fed the algorithm. I pulled up the LinkedIn profiles of the highest scorers on a separate monitor. The pattern emerged within 20 minutes. If you graduated from a target school, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, or a select few business schools, your base comp-align score started at 1.2. If you came from a state university, like I did, or a technical college, like Tasha Green, your baseline was 0.9. But it got worse. There was a variable labeled executive sponsor. Every person with a score above 1.3 had a direct line to a C-suite executive or a board member. Gavin Royce's sponsor listed was E. Crane. I knew that name. Elliot Crane was a board member. They were not paying Gavin for his skills. They were paying him because he was friends with the people who signed the checks. I looked back at my own row. My score was 0.78. The comments next to my score were a manifesto of corporate ingratitude. Category operational support. Profile maintenance heavy. Strategic impact low. Flight risk minimal. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Maintenance heavy. 3 months ago, a routing error threatened to corrupt the patient databases of 40 regional hospitals. I had spotted the anomaly in the logs before the automated alerts even triggered. I reversed the deployment, patched the code, and verified the integrity of the data, while the strategic impact leaders were at a happy hour. That incident alone saved the company an estimated $12 million in service-level agreement penalties and potential lawsuits. To the comp-align algorithm, that was just maintenance. It was the digital equivalent of mopping the floor. Because I fixed things before they broke, I was invisible. Because Gavin proposed broken things with expensive words, He was a visionary. I needed to verify this. I needed to know if the others felt the pressure, or if I was just projecting my own paranoia. I sent a secure message to Tasha Green. Meet me at the diner on 4th Street. 40 minutes. Do not use your work phone. Tasha looked exhausted when she slid into the booth opposite me. She was 32, brilliant, and perpetually anxious. She ordered a black coffee and kept glancing at the door. Is this about the rumors? Tasha asked. People are saying you looked like you were going to kill someone in the HR meeting. I am not going to kill anyone, I said calmly. I am just doing some math. Tasha, when was your last significant raise? She looked down at her coffee cup. 2 years ago, I got a 3% cost of living adjustment last year. Did you ask for more? Of course I did, Tasha said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. I sat down with Dana Kessler. I showed her my project completions. I showed her that I led the migration for the Western region. Dana told me that I was at the top of my band for a senior engineer too. She said if I just held on for the next cycle, they were reworking the levels and I would see a big correction. The next cycle, I repeated. She told you that 2 years in a row. Did she not? Tasha nodded. She said the market is tight. She said I need to demonstrate more leadership presence. Tasha, I said, leaning in. They hired a junior strategist last week. His name is Tyler. He is 23. Do you know what his starting salary is? Tasha shook her head. He is making $15,000 more than you are right now. Tasha went pale. She stared at me, waiting for the punchline. And it is not an accident, I continued. There is a scoring system. You are flagged as low-flight risk. They know you have a mortgage. They know you love the work. They are banking on the fact that you are too scared to leave. So they suppress your wages to subsidize the people they are afraid of losing. Tasha looked like she had been punched in the stomach. I trained Tyler, she whispered. I spent 4 hours yesterday explaining to him why we cannot use a public bucket for patient data. I know, I said, and they are laughing at us for it. I left Tasha at the diner. She was angry, but she was also awake. That was all I needed. I did not need an army yet. I just needed the soldiers to stop believing in the generals. I went back home and opened the drawer of my desk. Inside lay a folder I had received 2 days ago. It was an offer letter from Red Harbor Technologies. Red Harbor was everything Bright Forge was not. It was run by engineers. The CTO was a woman who had written half the kernel drivers we used in the industry. The offer was generous. The base salary was 45% higher than what I was making at Bright Forge. The title was Staff Reliability Engineer. I had hesitated to sign it because I felt a sense of ownership over the Bright Forge system. It was my baby. I had raised it. I did not want to abandon it. But looking at that spreadsheet, seeing the maintenance heavy label next to my name, I realized I was not a parent to the system. I was a hostage. I signed the Red Harbor offer letter. I scanned it and emailed it to their HR department. My start date was set for the day after tomorrow. Now I was free, and because I was free, I could finally ask the question that would set the trap. I opened my Bright Forge email client for the last time before I would go into the office to resign. I composed a new message to Dana Kessler, copying Marianne Holt. Subject query regarding compensation methodology and internal parity. Dear Dana, following our discussion regarding my compensation adjustment, I would like to request a formal breakdown of the criteria used to determine my pay band. Specifically, I am interested in understanding how the internal parity mentioned in our meeting is calculated, and what specific metrics are utilized to measure strategic impact versus operational execution. Furthermore, does the company utilize any automated scoring models or algorithmic coefficients to determine these bands? If so, I would like to review the data points associated with my employee profile to ensure accuracy. Regards, Claire Butler. It was a perfect corporate email, polite, direct, and dangerous. If they answered honestly, they would admit to using a biased algorithm. If they lied, they were creating a paper trail of deception. I waited. The response came 3 hours later. It was brief, it was dismissive, it was written by Dana, but I could hear Marianne's icy tone behind the words. Claire, our compensation philosophy is comprehensive and considers a multitude of factors including market data, role scope, and performance. We do not share the specific back-end mechanics of our evaluation process as the model is proprietary and confidential to HR and executive leadership. We consider this matter closed. Dana. I stared at the word. Proprietary. They claimed the discrimination was their intellectual property. I smiled. They had just walked right into the kill zone. They thought they were shutting me down. They did not realize that by refusing to explain the score, they had just handed me the legal leverage to expose the entire machine. I saved the email. I saved the spreadsheet. I looked at the clock. It was time to go to the office and hand Dana the envelope. They wanted to protect their proprietary model. I was about to show them what happens when the maintenance staff decides to stop maintaining the illusion. The air in Dana Kessler's office was recycled and stale, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive perfume. I sat in the same chair I had occupied days prior, but the dynamic had shifted entirely. Before, I had been a stunned employee receiving a pittance. Now, I was an adversary holding a royal flush. Dana sat with her hands clasped on the desk, her posture rigidly perfect. She had clearly been briefed that I was asking difficult questions via email. She wore the expression of a kindergarten teacher preparing to explain to a toddler why they could not eat the Play-Doh. "Claire," Dana began, her voice dripping with manufactured empathy. "I want to start by saying that I understand your feelings. It can be frustrating to see the organization change and evolve. Change is hard." I did not blink. I did not nod. I just watched her. "However," she continued, gaining confidence from my silence, "we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to remain competitive to attract top-tier talent. The market for strategic data leadership is incredibly aggressive right now, and our compensation packages reflect what we need to pay to bring those visionaries into the building." She used that word again, visionaries. "So, let me clarify," I said, my voice steady and low. "When you say talent, you are referring to the people who ask me every single morning what data lineage is. You mean the people who need me to draw them a diagram to explain why a server cannot hold infinite data." Dana stiffened. She adjusted her glasses. "We do not discuss the compensation or competencies of other employees. Claire, that is against policy." "You brought up the market," I countered. "You brought up the talent. I am simply asking for a definition, because from where I sit, the talent is currently being paid 40% more than the architect who actually keeps the database running. Is that the market reality you are referring to?" Dana sighed, a sharp exhale through her nose. "We use a banding system. Claire, you know this. Your role is categorized as operational support. The roles you are alluding to are categorized as strategic leadership. There is a premium for strategy. It is standard industry practice." I reached into my bag. I did not pull out the resignation letter yet. I pulled out a folder containing 3 single sheets of paper. I slid them across the desk, one by one. "Evidence number 1, I said, pointing to the first sheet. "This is the current market range for a principal reliability architect in this city, based on data from 3 independent recruitment firms. The bottom of the range is $180,000. I am currently making $145,000. You are underpaying me by $35,000 a year against the market floor, not even the median." Dana glanced at the paper but did not touch it. "Evidence number 2, I continued, sliding the second sheet. "This is a log of my on-call hours for the last 2 years. I have responded to critical outages outside of business hours 47 times. I have saved the company an estimated $9 million in SLA penalties. That is not operational support. That is revenue protection. In any other company, that is a strategic function." I paused. Dana looked uncomfortable. She started to reach for her water bottle. "And evidence number 3, I said, sliding the final sheet across. This was the dangerous one. It was a sanitized version of the analysis I had done on the team's pay gaps. I had removed the confidential data I stole, but the graph remained. It showed a clear, undeniable trend line. Men in the department were clustered at the top of the pay bands. Women, specifically the senior women who had built the legacy systems, were clustered at the bottom. There is a statistical anomaly here. Dana, I said, it looks like bias. It looks like the people who do the heavy lifting are being systematically devalued to pay for the people who make the slides. Dana's face hardened. The mask of empathy dropped. She was no longer the kindergarten teacher. She was the corporate gatekeeper. "Our models are vetted," she snapped. "We use Compaline. It is an industry-leading tool. It removes human bias by calculating value based on 30 different metrics." "And what are those metrics?" I asked. Because if the metric is executive sponsorship, then it is not an objective model. It is a popularity contest. Dana stood up. She planted her hands on the desk and leaned toward me. "The model is not wrong. Claire, it calculates the value of the role to the future of the company. It simply reflects the value system of Brightforge Systems." The room went silent. There it was. She had said it. She had admitted that the algorithm was working exactly as intended. It was designed to tell people like me that we were worth less because we maintained the present instead of selling a fantasy about the future. It reflects the value system of the company, I repeated slowly. Yes, Dana said, thinking she had won the point, and we need you to align with that system. I reached into my bag for the final time. I pulled out the white envelope. I took out my pen. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:14 in the morning. I wrote the time on the bottom of the paper. I stood up and placed the envelope gently on top of the graphs I had laid out. In that case, I said, looking Dana dead in the eye, I am leaving that value system. Dana looked at the envelope. She recognized it instantly. Panic flickered in her eyes. She knew the timing was catastrophic. We were in the middle of a migration week. Claire, be reasonable, she stammered, her voice pitching up. You cannot just walk out. You have a notice period. You have a non-disclosure agreement. You have intellectual property obligations. She came around the desk, trying to physically block my path to the door. We need a 2-week transition, she insisted. You have knowledge in your head that belongs to this company. If you leave without a handover, you are in breach of your contract. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back to her. I have spent 10 years writing documentation that you and Gavin ignored. I said, I have transferred everything I know into those documents. That is the company's property. Read them. But the context, Dana argued, the intuition, the experience. My experience, I said cold and sharp, is not intellectual property. My experience belongs to me. It is the only thing I own, and I am taking it with me. I opened the door. Claire, she shouted, we will enforce the non-compete. Good luck, I said. I stepped out of the office and closed the door behind me. The latch clicked with a sound finality that felt like a gunshot. I walked down the hallway. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I walked past the server room. I walked past the rows of engineers who were staring at their screens, unaware that the safety net had just been cut. I reached the elevator. I pressed the down button. And then I heard it. It started as a low hum, then a chirp, then another chirp. From the engineering pit behind me, a red light began to flash on the overhead dashboard. Ping, ping, ping. Voices started to rise. What is that? Latency is spiking. Why is the ingestion queue backing up? Call Claire. Someone call Claire. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing out the rising panic. As the metal box descended, I checked my watch. It had taken exactly 45 seconds for the system to realize I was gone. They had defended their pay gap. Now, they could pay the price. I sat in my car, the engine idling, watching the glass facade of the Bright Forge building reflected in my rearview mirror. I did not need to be inside to know exactly what was happening. I could feel the rhythm of the disaster as if it were my own heartbeat. When Dana Kessler ordered my immediate termination, she thought she was protecting the company. She thought she was cutting off a disgruntled employee before I could steal data or cause damage. But in her haste to follow the standard hostile exit protocol, she had made a fatal error. She had ordered IT to wipe my identity from the Active Directory instantly. She did not know that the break glass account the Supreme Administrative Override used to save the system during a catastrophe was cryptographically tethered to my biometrics. It was a security feature I had installed 3 years ago to prevent external hackers from hijacking the root access. By deleting me, she had effectively thrown the keys to the kingdom into a furnace. I looked at my watch. It had been 12 minutes since I left the room. Inside the server farm on the 3rd floor, the first domino was falling. The ingestion pipeline, which sucked in terabytes of patient data from hospitals across the country, had a built-in safety check every 10 minutes. It pinged my user ID to verify that a qualified architect was on the roster. It was a dead man's switch I had written to ensure that if the department was ever gutted, the system would freeze to prevent data corruption. The system pinged. It found nothing. I imagined the screens in the Network Operations Center turning from a calming blue to a violent, flashing red. My phone buzzed. It was not a text this time. It was a notification from a public status page I monitored. Bright Forge system service degradation. Ingestion latency high. It had begun. Inside the building, the scene would be chaotic. I knew that Ronan Pierce, our new chief technology officer, would be standing in the center of the pit. Ronan was a hardware guy. He liked boxes he could touch. He did not understand the fluid dynamics of a cloud-based data lake. He would be shouting for a status report. Gavin Royce would be standing next to him. Gavin, the man making 40% more than me, would be looking at the error logs and realizing they were written in a language he did not speak. According to a frantic text I received moments later from Tasha. Gavin's first command was, "Just restart the intake nodes. We need a clean state." I laughed out loud in my quiet car. Restarting the nodes while the queue was full was the worst possible thing they could do. It was like trying to stop a freight train by throwing a brick at the wheels. 10 minutes later, the status page updated again. Brightforge Systems, critical outage, data sync halted. The hospitals were starting to call. I could picture the customer support team on the second floor, their headsets lighting up simultaneously. A surgeon in Chicago would be trying to pull up a patient's MRI scan, and the screen would be spinning. A pharmacist in Seattle would be trying to verify a dosage, and the system would be timing out. They were flying blind. My phone rang. The screen displayed the name Marianne Holt, CFO. I let it go to voicemail. I waited 1 minute. It rang again. Marianne Holt. I let it go to voicemail again. I checked the time. 30 minutes since I resigned. Inside the war room, Miles O'Connor would be frantically flipping through the standard operating procedures binder. He would find the section on ingestion failure. He would read the steps I had written. Step 1, arc integrity of the SQL buffer. Step 2, if buffer is overloaded, execute script clear cache v4. Miles would type the command, but the system would reject it. Access denied. Administrator authorization required. Miles would turn to Ronan and say, "I need the admin override code, the break glass account." Ronan would turn to the IT director. The IT director would check the registry, and then the blood would drain from their faces as they realized that the break glass account was linked to the profile they had just scorched from the earth. My phone rang for the third time. I picked it up but said nothing. I just listened to the breathing on the other end. Claire, are you there?" It was Marianne. Her voice was an octave higher than usual. The icy composure was gone, replaced by the tremor of someone watching their quarterly bonus evaporate. "Hello, Marianne," I said pleasantly. "I am just driving home. Is there an issue with my exit paperwork?" "Claire, we have a situation," she said, trying to sound authoritative. "There seems to be a glitch in the transition. The ingestion servers are locking up. We need the passcode for the override account." "I do not have a passcode." "Marianne," I said, "I transferred all my credentials. The override is linked to the principal architect's active profile, but I am no longer the principal architect, and according to my exit notification, my profile no longer exists." "Well, can you come back?" she snapped, panic bleeding through. "Just for an hour. Come in. We will reactivate your ID. You fix this, and then we discuss the terms." "I am afraid I cannot do that." I said, "I am no longer an employee. Accessing your system would be a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I would not want to expose the company to legal liability." "Claire, listen to me," she shouted. "We have 3 major hospital networks down. This is not a game." "You are right, Marianne. It is not a game. It is the market reality. Good luck." I hung up. I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway. I was not going home. I was going to my attorney's office. Back at Brightforge, the crisis was escalating from a technical problem to an existential threat. Clayton Voss, the CEO, had stormed into the war room. I knew Clayton. He did not care about SQL buffers. He cared about optics. "Who can fix this?" Clayton demanded, looking around the room at his expensive team of strategists. "I want this fixed in 2 hours. Who is the lead here?" Gavin Royce cleared his throat. "We are applying an agile recovery framework." "Clayton, we are pivoting to a redundancy cluster." "Stop using buzzwords," Clayton roared. "Why is the data not moving?" Legal had arrived by then. The general counsel, a sharp woman named Veronica, started asking the questions that nobody wanted to answer. "Why can we not access the root system?" Veronica asked. "The permissions are locked," the IT director admitted. "They were tied to Claire Butler." "Why was Claire Butler locked out before we secured the keys?" Veronica pressed. Silence filled the room. All eyes turned to Dana Kessler and Marianne Holt. We wanted to secure the intellectual property," Dana whispered. "It was a standard termination." "You locked the only person with the keys out of the burning building," Veronica said, her voice deadly calm. "And you threw the keys inside with her before she left." Then came the sound that every executive fears more than death. The phone in the center of the conference table beeped. It was the speakerphone line dedicated to our largest client, the United Health Alliance. This is the CIO of United Health. A voice boomed through the room. We have been down for 45 minutes. Our contract states that for every hour of unscheduled downtime during peak operations, Bright Forge is liable for $50,000 in penalties. The clock started 45 minutes ago. You now owe us nearly $40,000, and I am watching the clock tick. $50,000 an hour. I was driving down the interstate, listening to the radio. I imagined the sound of $50,000 burning every 60 minutes. That was roughly 1/3 of my annual salary. They were burning through my yearly worth every 3 hours. And the best part was, they had done it to themselves. They had prioritized control over capability, and now they had neither. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail from Gavin. Claire, hey, it's Gavin. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot. We are a team, right? I need you to walk me through the command line. Just tell me what to type. I can get you a consulting fee approved. Maybe $500. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end. $500. They still did not get it. They thought this was about money. They did not realize that the price of disrespect is not calculated in dollars. It is calculated in ruins. I turned up the music. I wondered how high the penalty counter would go before they realized that they could not buy their way out of this with a consulting fee. They needed a miracle, and the miracle had just quit. By 1 p.m, the silence from my end had clearly become more terrifying to the Bright Forge executive team than the screaming of their clients. I was sitting in my living room, watching the notifications stack up on my personal laptop like planes circling an airport that had closed its runway. The first email from Marianne Holt arrived at 1:15. The subject line was simply, Contracting Agreement. Claire, we are prepared to offer you an emergency consulting rate of $250 an hour to assist with the current service interruption. Please reply with your availability. $250. It was an insult. It was barely double my old hourly rate, calculated against the salary they claimed was fair market value. I archived the email without replying. 20 minutes later, a second email arrived. Claire, we are authorized to increase the rate to $400 an hour. We can also discuss a retention bonus if you agree to return to the office immediately. I took a sip of water and watched the rain start to streak against my window. I did not touch the keyboard. At 2:00, the tone shifted from negotiation to desperation. The third email had no subject line. Name your rate. We will wire the retainer today. Just call us. Simultaneously, Dana Kessler decided to try the good cop routine. Her email was filled with the kind of corporate backtracking that usually requires a spinal removal surgery to perform. Claire, I think emotions were high this morning. I have spoken with Clayton and Marianne. We are willing to issue an exception approval to recalibrate your banding immediately. We can fast-track the Distinguished Engineer title. We want to make this right. Please do not let the team down. It was the phrase "let the team down" that finally made me type a response. They were trying to weaponize my loyalty to Miles and Tasha against me. They wanted me to feel guilty for the fire they had started. I hit reply to Marianne and Dana. I kept it surgical. I have accepted a position with Red Harbor Technologies. My start date is tomorrow. I am unavailable for consulting work due to conflicting employment obligations. Good luck with the recalibration. I hit send. Almost immediately, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but I knew who it was. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone while I organized my digital files. Claire, it is Gavin. His voice was unrecognizable. The smooth, confident baritone of the Director of Data Transformation was gone. In its place was the shrill, rapid-fire cadence of a man who was watching his career dissolve in real time. Hello, Gavin. Look, Claire, I know you are angry. I get it. The corporate politics, the pay stuff, it sucks. But we are a team, right? We are all data people here. I am a data person. Gavin, I said, you are a strategy person. Remember, that is why you get the premium. Claire, come on. Do not be like that. The board is breathing down my neck. Clayton is talking about a forensic audit. If I do not get the ingestion pipeline running in the next hour, they are going to hang me out to dry. Just tell me the command. Is it a pseudo command? Do I need to flush the DNS? He was throwing out random acronyms he had likely Googled in the last 10 minutes. Gavin, I said, I cannot help you. You are the director. This is the strategic impact you were hired to deliver. Figure it out. You are enjoying this, aren't you? His voice turned nasty, the facade of camaraderie cracking. You think you are so smart, but you know what? If this doesn't get fixed, it is on you. You abandoned your post. I resigned. Gavin, there is a difference, and I resigned because your model said I was easily replaced. So, replace me. I hung up. I thought that would be the end of the direct contact, but I underestimated how low they were willing to go. 10 minutes later, I received a text from Miles. Watch your back. Marianne is in the hallway screaming that you planted a logic bomb. They are telling the legal team that you sabotaged the code before you left to cause the outage on purpose. They are trying to build a case to sue you for damages. I felt a cold flash of anger. This was the dirty thing the stranger had warned me about. They were not just going to let me leave. They were going to try to destroy my reputation to save their own skins. If they could frame this as a malicious act by a disgruntled employee, they could claim insurance coverage for the downtime and avoid admitting that their own incompetence caused the crash. It was a smart play for a desperate executive, but it was a stupid play against a reliability architect. I opened my encrypted mail client. I drafted a new email to my attorney, attaching 2 specific files. The first file was the system log from the security server. It showed exactly when my access was revoked 10:17 in the morning. The second file was the server health log. It showed exactly when the first ingestion error occurred 10:38 in the morning. I wrote a brief note to my lawyer. They are going to claim sabotage. Here is the proof of causality. The error occurred 21 minutes after they revoked my access. The error code, as you can see in line 404, is an authentication failure on the automated cron job. This proves the system failed because it could not find me, not because I attacked it. If they make a public statement accusing me of sabotage, we will sue for defamation, and this log will be Exhibit A. I did not post this on social media. I did not argue with them in the Slack channels I could no longer access. I simply armed my lawyer. But I was not done. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to talk about value systems. Fine. I opened the browser and navigated to the confidential whistleblower portal of the BrightForge Board of Directors. This was a third-party service, monitored by an external audit firm, designed to bypass the CEO and report directly to the audit committee. I uploaded the total rewards spreadsheet. I uploaded the email from HR stating that the Compaline model was proprietary and used to determine pay bands. I uploaded my analysis showing the statistical correlation between executive sponsorship and salary, and the inverse correlation between protected class status and pay. Then I wrote my summary. To the audit committee. I am reporting a systemic risk to the organization that extends beyond the current technical outage. The executive leadership, specifically the CFO and head of people ops, are utilizing an unvalidated algorithmic model called Compaline to determine compensation. This model appears to artificially suppress the wages of female engineers and those without personal connections to the board, creating a discriminatory pay structure that violates the Equal Pay Act and Title VII. Furthermore, the current operational crisis is a direct result of this governance failure. The leadership team removed key technical personnel to protect this discriminatory model, resulting in a catastrophic loss of service for healthcare clients. The CEO is currently attempting to frame this management failure as employee sabotage. Attached is the raw data. I suggest you ask Mr. Elliot Crane why his sponsorship is a variable in the compensation algorithm for employees he does not manage. I hit submit. The confirmation screen flashed green. I leaned back in my chair. I had just turned a technical fire into a corporate governance nuclear explosion. At BrightForge, the panic was shifting. Miles texted me again. Something is happening. General Counsel just walked into Clayton's office with 2 security guards. Marianne looks like she's going to be sick. They thought they were fighting a server outage. They did not realize they were fighting for their professional lives. Clayton Voss, the man who wanted to build a talent brand, was about to find out that the most dangerous talent is the one you underestimate. He was not just losing a system, he was losing control of the narrative. And for a man like Clayton, that was worse than losing money. I closed my laptop. The rain had stopped. I had a new job to start tomorrow. I had a team at Red Harbor that actually wanted me there. But before I moved on, I checked the public status page for BrightForge one last time. Critical failure. Estimated time to recovery, unknown. Unknown. That was the most honest thing BrightForge had said in years. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Red Harbor Technologies conference room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was my first day, and the silence in the room was not the heavy, suffocating silence of a place waiting for an execution. It was the comfortable silence of people thinking. Across the table sat Dr. Marla Kensington, the Chief Technology Officer. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair tied back in a severe bun and a reputation for writing code that was more durable than concrete. She did not have a slide deck. She did not have a printed agenda. She had a notebook and a pen. "Welcome." "Claire," Marla said. Her voice was dry and direct. "We are glad to have you. I reviewed your GitHub repository last night. Your approach to asynchronous failover is elegant." I felt a knot in my shoulders loosen, a knot I had not realized was there for 5 years. She had looked at my code, not my strategic impact score, not my flight risk rating, but my work. "Thank you," I said. "I have one question for you to start," Marla said, clicking her pen. "What do you need from me to do the best work of your career?" I stared at her. I was prepared to fight for a budget. I was prepared to justify my existence. I was prepared to explain why I needed access to the root servers. "I need autonomy," I said, finding my voice, "and I need to know that if I raise a red flag, it will not be buried in a committee meeting." Marla wrote that down. "Done. You have full architectural authority on the ingestion reliability track. If you stop a deployment, it stays stopped until you clear it. Nobody overrides you, not even me." She slid a tablet across the table. "This is our internal wiki. It contains the salary bands for every level in the engineering department. You are coming in as a staff engineer. You can see the range for senior staff and principal. The criteria for promotion are technical, not political. You do not need to manage people to move up. You just need to solve harder problems." I looked at the screen. It was all there. Transparent, logical, fair. It was the exact opposite of the black box at Brightforge. I felt like a diver surfacing after holding my breath for too long. I was finally breathing oxygen again. While I was settling into a culture of respect, my former employer was suffocating in the vacuum I had left behind. I knew this because Miles O'Connor was still texting me. Brightforge had attempted to solve the crisis by throwing money at it. They had hired an external crisis response firm, a team of elite consultants who charged $600 an hour per head. These were the kind of consultants who wore expensive suits and spoke in confident, declarative sentences. But there was a problem. They did not know the system. "They are asking me where the encryption keys are stored." Miles texted me at lunch. I told them to ask Gavin. Gavin told them to ask me. The lead consultant just spent 3 hours reading a runbook from 4 years ago that you deprecated. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. They had refused to pay me a market rate, claiming they needed to save money for talent. Now, they were burning through cash at 5 times my hourly rate to pay strangers who were essentially asking Miles, the man they underpaid, how to do the job. The bleeding was not stopping. The United Health Alliance, the client that had threatened the $50,000 an hour penalty, had officially suspended their contract pending a security audit. That was 20% of Brightforge's annual revenue frozen in a single morning. The internal valuation of the company was shaking. Rumors of the outage had leaked to the tech blogs. The headline on a major industry site read, "Brightforge goes dark, hospital data, stranded in cloud limbo." That headline was the match that lit the fuse in the boardroom. The board of directors demanded a root cause analysis immediately. Usually, this meant blaming a technical failure, but my whistleblower complaint had changed the geometry of the battlefield. The board was not asking what broke. They were asking who broke it. Gavin Royce, sensing the shift in the wind, tried to maneuver. According to a friend in the admin department, Gavin submitted a request to transfer to the marketing division that very morning. He claimed his skills were better suited to brand narrative, now that the technical transformation was stalled. It was a cowardly attempt to flee the blast zone, but Ronan Pierce, the CTO, was not going to let Gavin escape alone. Ronan was throwing blame in every direction like a drowning man thrashing in the water. He blamed the legacy code. He blamed the lack of documentation. He even tried to blame the hardware vendor. But the person taking the heaviest fire was Dana Kessler. Dana had been summoned to an emergency session of the audit committee. They wanted to know why the break glass protocol had failed. They wanted to know why the principal architect had left with zero notice. And most importantly, they wanted to know about the email I had forwarded. I received an email from Tasha Green later that afternoon. "Claire, it is a bloodbath. Legal is seizing laptops in HR." Dana was crying in the break room. But the scary part is that people are starting to talk. The women in QA, the database team. We all started comparing notes after you left. We realized we are all in the same boat. Everyone wants to do something, but they are terrified. They saw how they treated you. They think if they speak up, they will just get fired too. I sat in my new office at Red Harbor, looking at the city skyline. I remembered that fear. It was the fear that kept you small. It was the fear that made you accept 2.1% when you deserved 20. I replied to Tasha. Tasha, they cannot fire everyone. The system is already broken. They need you more than you need them right now. But do not just be angry. Be smart. Tell everyone to write it down. Every time they were passed over. Every time a less qualified man was hired at a higher rate. Every time HR dismissed a concern. Gather the data. Documentation is not just for code. It is for justice. Do not carry this alone. I hoped she would listen. Tasha was strong. She just needed to realize that her strength was a leverageable asset. But the real revelation, the twist that would turn the knife in the wound, came just before I left the office for the day. My attorney called me. He had received a preliminary communication from the independent investigator hired by the Bright Forge board. The board was terrified of a class action lawsuit, so they were digging into the Compalign tool to see how bad the exposure was. What they found was not just negligence, it was a product feature. Claire, you are not going to believe this, my attorney said, his voice sounding tinny through the phone speaker. The investigator found the marketing materials from the vendor that sold Compalign to Bright Forge. And I asked? The vendor explicitly markets the tool as a retention cost optimization engine. It does not measure value, it measures leverage. I closed my eyes. I had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed was physically painful. Explain, I said. The algorithm specifically targets employees with high organizational commitment and low mobility factors, people with families, people who have been there a long time, people who do not update their LinkedIn profiles often. It flags them as safe to squeeze. It recommends the lowest possible raise that will not trigger a resignation, based on predictive behavioral analysis. It was designed to underpay the most loyal employees because the model predicted they would not leave. And it flagged Gavin as high risk, I said, realizing the full scope of the scam. Exactly. Gavin fits the profile of a mercenary, high mobility, aggressive self-promotion. The model said to overpay him to keep him. The model said to underpay you because it thought you were trapped. The model was wrong, I said softly. The model failed to account for one variable, my attorney said with a dry chuckle. It failed to calculate the blast radius of a person who finally decides they have had enough. I hung up the phone. I looked at the sleek modern monitor on my desk at Red Harbor. Bright Forge had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for a piece of software that told them it was smart to abuse their best people. They had outsourced their conscience to an algorithm, and the algorithm had driven them off a cliff. They thought they were optimizing costs. In reality, they were buying their own destruction. I packed my bag. I did not take any files with me. I did not need to protect myself anymore. The truth was out, and it was far uglier than even I had imagined. I walked to the elevator of my new building. I pressed the button. In the reflection of the steel doors, I saw a woman who was no longer just an operational resource. I saw a woman who had just proven that loyalty has a market price, and the price had just gone up. Tomorrow, the investigation would turn into a purge, but tonight, I was going to go home and sleep for 8 hours straight, knowing that somewhere in the city, the servers were still red, and for the first time in 10 years, it was not my problem to fix them. The internal investigation at Bright Forge Systems did not look like a standard corporate review. It looked like an autopsy of a living patient. While I was sitting in my new office at Red Harbor, enjoying the novelty of a computer system that actually worked, the board of directors at Bright Forge was tearing the executive team apart in a conference room 10 miles away. I knew the details not because I was there, but because the independent investigator, a man named Mr. Sterling, had to interview me as the primary whistleblower. Through our conversations and the transcripts provided to my legal counsel, I had a front-row seat to the destruction of the people who had tried to erase me. The hearing began on a Tuesday morning. The audit committee sat on one side of the mahogany table, and the leadership team, Clayton Voss, Marianne Holt, and Dana Kessler, sat on the other. They looked less like visionaries and more like students waiting for the principal to expel them. Mr. Sterling opened the session by projecting a single email chain onto the smartboard. It was the digital fingerprint of their prejudice. The email was dated 8 months prior. It was sent from Marianne Holt to Dana Kessler. The subject line was Re-engineering Band Adjustments. Mr. Sterling read the text aloud to the silent room. Dana, I am rejecting the proposed market adjustments for the senior engineering group. We cannot set a precedent of reacting to every inflation shift for the technical staff. If we raise the floor for the reliability team, we will break the salary structure for the entire department, keep them in the current band, Use the comp-align loyalty metric to justify the cap. They are risk-averse. They will not leave. The silence that followed must have been deafening. Marianne had not just made a budgeting decision. She had put it in writing that she viewed the technical staff as a captive resource to be exploited. Mrs. Holt, Sterling asked, according to the transcript, did you authorize the use of the comp-align tool specifically to suppress wages for employees identified as low mobility? Marianne tried to deflect. It was a cost containment strategy. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders to manage overhead. And does that fiduciary duty include violating the Equal Pay Act by systematically underpaying female engineers who have longer tenure than their male counterparts? Sterling asked. Marianne did not answer. The spotlight then turned to Dana Kessler. Dana was the one who had actually executed the orders. She looked exhausted. The confident gatekeeper who had slid the 2.1% raise across the table was gone. Ms. Kessler, Sterling pressed, you defended the model. You told Ms. Butler that it reflected the company's value system. Did you know the model was biased? Dana looked at Clayton, then at Marianne. Neither of them met her eyes. She realized in that moment that she was the designated sacrifice. I was under pressure, Dana confessed, her voice shaking. Marianne told me that if we admitted the model was flawed, we would have to audit the entire payroll. It would cost millions in back pay. She told me to protect the model at all costs. She said we could not afford a recalibration. So you chose to sacrifice the integrity of the pay structure to save the budget for the quarter. I was following orders, Dana whispered. It was the oldest excuse in the book, and it never worked. As the hearing spiraled, Clayton Voss decided to make his move. He realized that the ship was sinking, and he needed a lifeboat. He thought I could be that lifeboat. My phone rang at 7 in the evening. I was at home, cooking dinner. Claire, Clayton said. His voice was warm, projected with that fake intimacy he used in all-hands meetings. I have been doing a lot of thinking. The things I am hearing in this investigation, they are disturbing. I want you to know I was not fully aware of how Marianne was implementing the policy. I stirred my pasta sauce. Is that so? Clayton, you signed the budget. I rely on my CFO, he said quickly. But listen, Claire, we need to fix this. The company is bleeding. The clients are scared. We need a symbol of stability. I want you to come back. I stopped stirring. Come back. Yes, but not as a principal architect. I am offering you the position of Vice President of Engineering. We will give you equity. Significant equity. We are talking about a package worth $500,000 a year. We need you to stand on a stage with me and tell the market that we have fixed the problem. It was a staggering amount of money, a year ago. I might have cried with joy at such an offer, but now, I saw it for what it was. It was a bribe. He did not want my skill. He wanted my face. He wanted to parade me around like a trophy to prove that Brightforge was not a discriminatory hellhole. Clayton, I said, you are offering me a title and money, but you haven't mentioned a single policy change. You haven't mentioned firing the people who built the system. You just want me to cover for you. We can discuss policy later, Clayton urged. Right now, we need to stop the stock from crashing. If you come back, the lawsuit goes away. The narrative changes. The narrative is the truth. Clayton, I said, and I am not going to help you hide it. I am not your shield. I hung up. The next morning, the dam broke. Tasha sent me a message at 10 in the morning. 3 more senior engineers just resigned. They saw the leaked transcript of Marianne calling us risk-averse. They are furious. We are not risk-averse anymore. We are just done. The exodus was not just limited to the engineering team. 2 project managers and a database administrator handed in their notices by lunch. The risk-averse employees were proving to be the most volatile element in the company, simply because they had been compressed for so long. When the pressure was released, the explosion was inevitable. The clients were reacting to the chaos. A major regional bank that used Brightforge for transaction logging sent a formal letter of concern. They were not just worried about the downtime, they were worried about the operational risk of a company that was being investigated for fraud. They threatened to pull their contract within 30 days if stability was not restored. But the final blow, the twist that turned the investigation from a corporate dispute into a scandal, came from the board itself. Mr. Sterling had kept digging into the comp-align data. He wanted to know why Gavin Royce, a man with 0 coding skills, had such a high strategic impact score. He looked at the variable labeled executive sponsor. Gavin's sponsor was listed as E. Crane. Elliot Crane was a long-standing member of the board of directors. He was the head of the compensation committee. Sterling found a series of personal emails between Elliot Crane and Gavin Royce. It turned out that Gavin was not just a random hire. He was the nephew of Elliot Crane's wife. Gavin had been parachuted into the company as a favor. The high-potential pipeline program had been manipulated to create a high-paying job for a family member who couldn't cut it elsewhere. The entire transformation strategy was a smokescreen to justify paying a relative $200,000 a year. When this news hit the board, the infighting turned lethal. The other board members, terrified of being implicated in a nepotism scandal that could trigger shareholder lawsuits, turned on Elliot Crane. I received a call from my lawyer, who was laughing in disbelief. "Claire, Elliot Crane just resigned from the board effective immediately. They are scrubbing his bio from the website. The conflict of interest is undeniable. He was voting on compensation packages that directly benefited his family member while suppressing the wages of the staff who actually did the work. The rot went all the way to the top. It wasn't just Marianne's greed or Dana's compliance. It was a failure of governance at the highest level." I sat in my office at Red Harbor and watched the news unfold on my monitor. I had started this with a single resignation letter, hoping to get a fair raise. Now, I had decapitated the leadership of a $100 million company. I stayed silent. I did not give interviews. I did not post on LinkedIn. I let the silence do the work. The more desperate they became, the more leverage I gained. Late that afternoon, I received a courier package at my home address. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope with the official seal of the Brightforge Board of Directors. It was not from Clayton. It was from the chairman of the board. I opened it. The letter was short. There were no buzzwords. There were no attempts to manipulate me with team spirit. "Dear Ms. Butler, the Board of Directors has reviewed the preliminary findings of the internal investigation. We acknowledge that significant errors in judgment and governance have occurred. We recognize that the operational stability of Brightforge systems relies on the technical excellence that you and your team provided. We are no longer asking for a consulting rate. We are not asking for a negotiation. We are asking for your terms. Please submit a list of conditions under which you would consider assisting us in stabilizing the platform and restructuring the engineering department. We are prepared to grant you full authority to implement the necessary changes. Sincerely, the Board of Directors." I put the letter down on my kitchen counter. They finally understood. This was not about money. It never was. You cannot pay someone enough to be disrespected. I took out a notepad. I did not write down a dollar figure. I started writing down rules. If they wanted me back, even just to fix the mess they made, they were going to have to rebuild the entire house, and this time, I was going to be the architect. I walked back into the lobby of Brightforge Systems 3 days later. The security guard, a man named Marcus, who had known me for 6 years, did not ask to see a badge. He simply nodded and buzzed me through. He looked at me with a new kind of respect, the way one looks at a person who has walked through a fire and come out holding a flamethrower. I was not wearing a suit. I was wearing jeans and a blazer. I was not an employee anymore. I was a consultant, and consultants dress however they want. The meeting was held in the executive boardroom, the one with the view of the bay that I had only ever seen in company-wide Zoom calls. When I entered, they were all there. Clayton Voss, the CEO, sat at the head of the table. Marianne Holt, the CFO, sat to his right, looking pale and diminished. Dana Kessler from HR was there, along with the general counsel, Veronica, and Mr. Sterling, the independent investigator. There was an empty chair at the end of the table. It was waiting for me. "Claire," Clayton said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was clammy. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate you making the time. I am charging you $450 an hour." "Clayton," I said, not taking a seat immediately. "My time is literally money. Let us not waste it on pleasantries." I opened my leather portfolio and placed a single document on the table. It was not a resume. It was a term sheet. "Before I type a single command to restore your ingestion pipeline," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room, "we need to agree on the conditions of my assistance. These are not negotiable." I slid the paper toward Veronica, the general counsel. She picked it up and began to read. "Item 1, I recited, Brightforge will immediately institute a technical excellence track. This track will allow senior individual contributors to advance to levels equivalent to director and vice president in both title and compensation, without requiring them to manage personnel. You will no longer penalize people for being good at building things instead of talking about things." Clayton nodded quickly. "Agreed. We should have done that years ago." "Item 2, I continued. You will conduct a third-party audit of the comp-align model. You will publish the criteria for all salary bands to the internal employee portal. No more black boxes. No more proprietary secrets regarding why one person makes 40% more than another. Marianne flinched. She stared at the table, refusing to look at me. Item 3, I said, looking directly at Dana. Brightforge will issue retroactive pay corrections for every employee in the engineering department who was identified as underpaid by your own internal analysis, but suppressed due to low flight risk status. You will pay them what they earned, plus interest. That will cost millions, Marianne whispered, her voice barely audible. It will cost less than the lawsuit I'm prepared to file if you refuse, I replied, and it costs significantly less than losing your entire engineering staff to Red Harbor, where I am currently hiring. The room went silent. I had them. And finally, item 4, I said, you will eliminate the executive sponsorship variable from all performance reviews. Promotion will be based on output, reliability, and peer review, not on who your uncle is on the board. Clayton looked at Mr. Sterling. The investigator gave a subtle nod. We accept all terms, Clayton said. Please, Claire, fix the system. I sat down. I will fix the system. But first, we need to clear the air about why it broke. I understand there is a rumor circulating that I planted a logic bomb. I understand that the leadership team told legal that this was an act of sabotage. I looked at Marianne. She turned a shade of gray that matched the walls. I have the logs here, I said, sliding a USB drive across the table to Veronica. This drive contains the time-stamped record of every action I took in my final 48 hours. It also contains the system logs showing exactly when the failure started. Veronica plugged the drive into her laptop. A graph appeared on the main screen. As you can see, I pointed to the red line. The ingestion failure began at 10:38 in the morning. My access was revoked at 10:17. The error code is a permission denial. The system failed because it was designed to check for my specific biometric signature to authorize the high-volume data transfer. I did not break it. You broke it by removing the key while the car was moving. It was a fail-safe, I said, my voice hardening. I built it to prevent unauthorized external access. If you had read the documentation I sent you 3 years ago, you would have known how to transfer the key, but you did not read it. You assumed I was just a maintenance worker. You assumed the system ran on magic, not on the labor of people you refuse to value. This confirms it, Veronica said, closing the laptop. There is no evidence of sabotage. The statement regarding Ms. Butler causing the outage was false and defamatory. Veronica turned to Marianne. Marianne, you authorized the statement accusing Claire of sabotage, did you not? Marianne tried to speak, but no words came out. She just nodded. That is a massive liability exposure, Veronica said coldly. We will need to address that immediately. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. I spent the next 4 hours in the server room with Miles O'Connor. We didn't need to speak much. We just worked. I transferred the cryptographic keys. I reset the ingestion protocols. I updated the runbooks. By 3 in the afternoon, the dashboard turned from red to green. The data began to flow. The hospital networks came back online. The crisis was over. But the real reckoning was just beginning. When I walked out of the server room, I saw security guards standing at Marianne Holt's desk. She was placing personal items into a cardboard box. She was not being arrested, but she was being erased. The board had demanded her resignation effective immediately. She would leave with a severance package, surely, but her reputation in the industry was incinerated. Gavin Royce was nowhere to be found. I later learned that his transfer to marketing was denied. Instead, his role was eliminated due to restructuring, and he was escorted out of the building, without his uncle on the board to protect him. He was just another expensive suit with no skills, and the company had no use for him. Dana Kessler kept her job, but her power was stripped. She was placed under a performance improvement plan and ordered to implement the pay equity audit under the supervision of an external firm. 2 weeks later, I received the first payment for my consulting invoice. It was for $18,000. It was a significant sum for a few days of work, but the money was not the trophy. The trophy came in the form of a text message from Tasha Green. Claire, you are not going to believe this. I just got called into a meeting with the new VP of Engineering. They showed me my new compensation band. They bumped me up 45%. They gave me the title of staff engineer. They also cut a check for 2 years of back pay. I am literally crying in the parking lot. Thank you. I sat in my office at Red Harbor and smiled. I had not just secured a raise for myself. I had broken the ceiling for everyone who came after me. The system at Bright Forge was stable now, but it was a different kind of stability. It was no longer built on the silence of the exploited. It was built on the respect of the essential. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was tired. It had been a long war. But as I looked at the Principal Reliability Architect plaque that I had taken with me from my old desk, the only physical souvenir I kept, I realized something. They had told me I was maintenance. They had used it as an insult. But they forgot what maintenance actually means. Maintenance is the act of preserving what matters. It is the act of keeping the world from falling apart. And sometimes, to maintain the integrity of a system, you have to be willing to burn down the parts that are rotten. I opened my email. There was a message from a young woman I did not know, a junior engineer at Bright Forge. Subject: thank you. Hi, Claire. I know you don't know me. I started 3 months ago. I was terrified to ask for anything. I watched what you did. I watched you walk out, because of you. I just got my contract revised. I just wanted to say thank you for showing us that we don't have to accept the scraps. I typed a short reply. You are welcome. Just remember when they tell you, that is the market. Sometimes the only thing you need to do is walk away from the counter where you are selling yourself too cheap. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Claire's journey reminded you of your own worth. If you enjoyed this story, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Please subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to hear it.